Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, one of the civic partners for our show. My guest today is Sandy Camillo. Sandy is an author, the president-elect of AAUW-New York State, and an expert on ageism. She writes about it extensively and routinely points out examples of how it presents itself in American culture and society. Ageism is one of the last socially acceptable prejudices. Ageism is defined as discrimination against older people because of negative and inaccurate stereotypes. It is so ingrained in our culture that we often don't even notice that we are a victim or doing it ourselves. Sandy, welcome to North Country Matters. I am so pleased that you are with us as a guest to talk about this really important topic. Let's start by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in this topic and an expert on it.
I don't know if I would call myself expert on it, but I am a very serious researcher. And that research started about 20 years ago when I had moved to St. Louis, Missouri. And I decided to get involved with some organization. That organization was AAUW. I eventually went on the board of one of their branches. And I was considered one of the younger board members then, which I think back thinking, wow, that seems so long ago. But I was shocked and surprised and a little bit horrified to see that there was a lot of bickering back and forth going on the board based on the different members' ages. The people that were younger really gave no credibility to the older members' wisdom. All they would do was criticize them as, well, they're old, they're sort of out of it. The same token, the older members on that board look at the younger members and think, they don't know what they're talking about. These people have not done enough to be able to be experienced to speak. So that was my first touch of understanding how ageism could affect people, and especially considering it was on a board of an organization that promotes equity for women, which should be in all respects. So eventually I got involved with the national board, and I thought, well, certainly this is Washington, D.C. I'm not going to experience any of this on the national board. I was horrified to see it was actually worse. Okay. We had a wider spread of ages because AUW, a lot of the members are actually much older. And some of the board members were really young. So I was surprised again to see, and they would overtly make comments thinking, well, it's acceptable somehow. And that was the part that got me, that it was acceptable to make a comment that was discriminating against somebody because of their age, but they would never think of making that same comment about somebody's race, about somebody's religion. And yet they were discriminating. So then I started writing a blog about ageism. That's how I got really deeply involved. And the more you start to investigate, the more horrifying it becomes. I personally experienced it in our own lives. My husband, who's an attorney, was let go from his job, and we traced it back to ageism. And eventually, this is the way a lot of these things turn out. We filed a lawsuit, and it was settled to our favor. But a lot of people, don't want to have to do that, and why should they? So that's my story of how I got really involved with ageism.
You make a really good point about how unconscious many of us are about that particular issue. And I notice as I get older, I tend, for example, I look at a doctor and say, oh my gosh, they look like they're in high school. But they're really not because they've gone through many, many years of training to get to the point where they are. So it's very unconscious. And we think about that in terms of, gosh, I've lived all these years. What don't I know? Well, obviously quite a lot. And so it's very interesting that you were beginning to observe that and saw how that went. And you're quite right about discrimination. Very few people are in a position to actually put a lawsuit together to deal with any discrimination issue, let alone ageism. And there's so much education we have to do around this. So I'm so glad that you're here to do that. So I gave a little brief explanation of ageism at the top of the show, but talk to us more in depth about it. What is ageism? How does it present itself?
Well, I think that's very interesting, Donna, because you stole some of my thunder. You said something I was going to bring up right now, but I'll repeat it anyway. It's important. Ageism is when we attribute the same identical characteristics to people because they're a certain age. And that age could be a 20-year-old or an 80-year-old. It doesn't, a lot of people think ageism and automatically just attribute it to older people. That's not the case. And you brought up a very good example. And I was guilty of this myself. Okay. You go to a doctor, or in our case, we went to an attorney. Okay. And the attorney was 31 years old. And this is my husband's case. And my daughter's also a lawyer. We have a lot of lawyers in our family. I told my daughter the attorney was 31 years old. And I was thinking the same thing, but I didn't express it. But by then I was deeply entrenched in fighting ageism. And she said to me, she was 34. Why would you go to a 31-year-old attorney? Okay, I mean, don't you want to get somebody who's really experienced? As it turned out, this attorney was brilliant. He was a genius. He knew his stuff. He had the enthusiasm, and he helped us in that case tremendously. It had nothing to do with his age. Every person has their own capabilities, and that's what we tend to forget. We just cubbyhole people. We put them into little boxes, okay, and say, well, at this age, this is how you are. At this is how you are. I actually just had a conversation with my brother, who's 10 years older than me, who was telling me how he can't do things he used to do because of his age. And I said, okay, you can't do things you used to do, but you can still do other things you haven't yet done. So why don't you start doing them? Okay. I never thought I would write, I'm getting ready to have my second book published. I never thought I would be doing that in my later years. Never in a million years. I've done so many different jobs because I was always searching to have more as a woman. Okay. And back when I was a young girl, you were either a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary. I wanted more. Okay. But at the same time, you have to realize age has nothing to do with it. You still have the same dreams you had when you were a child. You still want to be happy, whether you're a young girl or an older woman. So I think that people have to stop attributing certain qualities and certain characteristics to someone based just on their age, whether it's younger or older.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's the sort of thing that you really have to look at yourself and your own prejudices and combat it as well as combating it in society. Just like other forms of discrimination, inaccurate stereotypes about aging harm all of us, young or old. And
Right.
for example, we see the same thing with race or gender identity. And, you know, these things are constantly in the news. People are constantly talking about these issues, but they're not talking about ageism. Does language promote ageism?
Yes, but before we get into the language, I want to talk about something else because I've heard this said so many times, Donna. Okay. Well, I mean, how do these people know how old I am? How does somebody discover how old you are? And we very, cleverly, we think, tell people, well, when you're applying for a job, for instance, don't put down your high school graduation dates. Okay. Don't put down your college graduation dates. It's almost meaningless to tell people that because we have now social platforms that actually specialize in telling everything about a person to the world. Spokeo is one of those. Okay. If you enter a person's name on Spokeo, you could immediately find out how old they are. So it becomes it's almost a thing where you're battling against something that makes you stop and say, are we really addressing the right problem here? Is it how old I am, or is it the perception that people have of me because of a certain age? And I think that's why it's so important to fight against ageism, because you're never really going to be able to combat when a job, you're looking for a job and you have that recruiter, and all they need to do is go online and insert your name, and they could find out your age. So I think that's the important thing, number one. Number two, language. Okay. Now, I could tell you right now, I am sure that if everybody that's out there right now thinks about it, we are all guilty of ageism in our language, our use of language. I'll give you a common example. I'm having a senior moment. You ever say that? I'm sure you have. I've said it too, and I catch myself and I stop. What are we saying when we say things like that? Are younger people never capable of forgetting things? I know they are because I see them do it all the time. That's an acceptable term, a senior moment. It should not be acceptable. The words that we use to describe older people. My favorite one is senior. And people, don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I'm getting picky, but there is something wrong with it. If you're a senior, when you were in high school, remember being a senior? That was really an esteemed thing, right? You were a senior, you reached the pinnacle. That made sense saying you were a senior in high school. What exactly does senior mean when you speak about age? Is a younger person a junior? Not unless their father has the same name as theirs, and they usually hook that word junior, but it has no meaning. The only meaning it has is to classify a certain age and put them aside. And we don't want to be doing that, okay? The other words that I love, and I have to look down because I've said so much about ageism that I tried to cut it together and compact it. So I made little notes here about it. Boomer. Boomer. What did that mean? That meant people that were born between a certain period of years. That's all it meant. Okay. You were a boomer if you were born between these years and these years. Okay. Now it's a derogatory term. That person's a boomer. Okay. Geezer. They don't use that much anymore, but I've heard it used depending on what part of the country you're in. They are all derogatory terms. They should be eliminated from our language. One of the best ones that I read about, and I never knew, the word feisty. When somebody says, oh, that woman is really feisty, people think it means that they're really tough. But what it really means, it's a German word, and it means a small, aggressive dog. So why would we want to call somebody feisty? We should not do it. When we call somebody spry, it means that they're active, right? Oh, look at that 90-year-old, they're very spry. And yet you will never hear that term used for somebody under the age of, say, 70. So certain words that we use in themselves are ageist words, and we should watch our language. And I'm constantly stopping people when they say things, and I know they don't like it, but I think it's important that we start with our language. When we say aging in place, I don't know if you ever heard that, aging in place. It sounds like we became a plant and they put us in the corner of the room and we're now a potted plant, okay? I love the one aging gracefully. I picture this woman, it's always a woman because she always has a long flowing white dress on, and she's sort of like tiptoeing or dancing through a field of flowers, okay? That's not what people are aging, period. We're getting older. If we're not getting older, we're dead. When you stop aging, it means you're not alive anymore. The elderly, that word is probably one of the worst. When you say the elderly, it usually puts up a picture of someone who's frail and in decline. It does not give you an image of a vibrant individual, regardless of their age, okay? Just because you're 80, it does not mean you're no longer vibrant. It no longer means that you don't want to go out and have a good time. It doesn't mean any of those things. But we've got to clean up our language.
I think you make some really, really good points there, and I appreciate that. So, Sandy, let's talk a little bit about how ageism presents itself. What are some examples of ageism in employment? And I know you talked a little bit about that in terms of a prospective employer being able to find out how old you are, but really there is more to it than just how old you are, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. There's a tremendous amount. I think one of the most interesting examples, and I was really taken aback with this, okay? We look to our judges to give the definitive decision on whether something is discrimination or not, right? And yet in New York State, judges must retire at the age, Supreme Court judges must retire at the age of 70. Now, if we're telling them that you have to retire at the age of 70, how then do we expect them to make decisions on age discrimination cases when they're being discriminated against themselves? Okay. People have said, well, judges, they have a job where they're making major decisions that they could affect society. So we want to make sure they're competent. That's fine. Just like you do in any job. If a person's not competent in a job, they get fired. If a judge is not competent, fire them. Judge that judge, which is almost a joke on it, but decide whether that judge should continue in their job based on their individual competency, not because they hit a magic age and they should be retired. I have a couple of examples here that I'm going to read to you because they're straight out of research, okay? There was a help wanted, no, not this one. This, there is, okay, a job case advertisement on Facebook. Job case posts different positions, all right? And the job said retired, stay busy, and earn. But the ad was accompanied by a photo of a supermarket employee. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a supermarket employee. It's a very valid, good job, okay? But why was that the only position that they posted to as an example? Are they suggesting that if you're older, you can no longer get a job as an executive? Tasia Wagalia, a technical recruiter based in Phoenix, Arizona, told JobScan that he had a client. This one is amazing, okay? And the client specifically asked for young, pretty people. Person actually asked, young people, pretty people. They said, I don't care how many years of experience they have. I need young, pretty people. These are actual things. These are not just thoughts that maybe this could happen, all right? The New York Times reported a lawsuit against Ohio State University. And this lawsuit resulted from an email that inadvertently was sent from the department head to one of his staff members, okay, about his older employees. This email stated that he was dealing with an extraordinarily change-adverse population of people, almost all of whom are over the age of 50, contemplating retirement, and it's like herding hippos. Like herding hippos, okay? According to the New York Times, he was getting rid of dead wood. The two employees won $765,000 in that lawsuit. I have a feeling that that was probably the last time that he ever made comments like that. What would you think? Okay, and this would apply, this is applicable to all employment situations. If people saw advertisements that said, no people of color or women need apply, and yet want ads routinely discriminate by age, okay? Older people are constantly discriminated against. Many ads have say things such as no more than 3 years experience. Now, unless you start working at the age of 60, it's very unlikely you would only have no more than 3 years experience. So there's many different ways of them approaching this discrimination. And we have to look at those ways and speak out when we see them. Write letters to the editor. Have people be aware of this. You know, don't just accept it. And I think we have a tendency to accept this and to say, oh, well, it just goes on. But no, people are filing lawsuits. And like we said, not everybody can do that. But everybody could spread the word that this is not acceptable, just like it's not acceptable to discriminate because of race, religion.
That's right. And you make some really good points there. You know, another area that I want to chat with you about is ageism in medical treatment. There was an article in the Washington Post a few weeks ago talking about the fact that there are very few physicians who are actually going into the kind of medicine that treats people as they age and the conditions that they have, so that if you're an older American and you're looking for health care that is actually going to meet your needs, you're going to have a very difficult time finding a doctor with that kind of experience and training. And that means that a lot of people who are giving medical treatment now really don't understand what happens to the body when as it begins to age.
That's exactly right, Donna. And there's a lot of studies on that. And a lot of studies have shown that many medical schools don't require, okay, a course to show what's the difference here? How do we treat this? There are very few gerontologists. I mean, it's not being addressed, okay? And there's a study that went on in England that was studying lung cancer patients, and it showed that those patients were not being offered the kind of surgeries if they were older, they would be offered if they were younger. It just didn't happen. In addition to that, the testing that might have showed different ways to approach it wasn't being done. They just gave up on them. They said, all right, you're old. I'm sure that all of us have heard the saying, you know, when you ask, what did somebody die of if they're older? Okay. And you hear the response, they died of old age. There is no such thing. You don't die of old age. I don't care if you're 100. You die of something, okay? Either your heart failed, your lungs collapse. It wasn't old age that killed you, but even the medical community, if you go to a doctor and speak to them and tell them you have, oh, my back is hurt. Well, you're getting older. Okay. That's not acceptable. You have to explain to a person what is the reason. And that explanation, many times, if you have an older person going in with a caretaker to visit a doctor, they don't speak to the older person. They speak to the caretaker. It's like, you don't exist. You're just a piece of meat. I'm talking to the younger person that's sitting over here. In addition to that, when they do speak to the older person, they speak down to them by using baby talk. That's a very common thing. The next time you meet people that are much older, say in their 80s or 90s, okay, ask them when they last went to the doctor, how were they addressed by that doctor? Were they addressed by Mr. or Mrs., or were they addressed dear, honey? These are the ways that people have accepted for many, many years that people should be treated when they go to a doctor's office if they're older. And it's not acceptable. And again, unless we speak out, it'll continue happening. So,
So
there are.
Sandy, again, what we're talking about, stuff that is a socially acceptable prejudice because we haven't thought about it and we haven't given it the kind of attention that it needs in order to break that habit.
That's right. And I think that, again, doctors aren't being trained. It starts with that. If you're not trained to understand the different ways to diagnose an older person, you're not going to do it. And I think it's sad. Even older people themselves, say this. They say, well, I'm just getting older. What can I expect? You could expect whatever you would have expected 20 years ago. Go and address your problems. Don't just address your age.
Right. I think that's really smart. And a person is more than an accumulation of symptoms. You don't just enter the symptoms in a little handheld device and up pops a pill. Oh, this will take care of it. You really have to find out a lot about the person: nutrition, exercise, lifestyle. We have to be treated as a whole body, not just a collection of symptoms. So, and that's true regardless of your age, but I think that's particularly true for us. So one of the things, Sandy, that we've seen the effect of ageism is during the current political climate. In fact, I recently read that once President Biden dropped out of the presidential race, the media attention on age immediately disappeared. And it was a huge focus before. So that kind of negative media attention is a distraction for the many important considerations that weren't being talked about earlier in the campaign. So what are some other examples of ageism in advertising and the media, not just in the political field, that you can give us?
I think this is the area that is the most frustrating because no matter how many times, like I say, I write on X about ageism, and there are many people that are writing about this, and we direct this to the advertisers, to people that should be listening. There's only one way we could stop this kind of stuff happening is by not buying the products of the advertisers that do these things. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. Advertising is the worst, okay? And starting with when I read an ad, I couldn't believe that it was real, but it was. Uniworld is a very big cruise line. They had an advertisement for a cruise that they were advertising for people under 45 years of age. Now, at first I thought, okay, does that mean they're asking for your birth certificate when you sign up for this cruise? And what could be the possible reason that they would ask for people under the age of 45? So I started thinking about it and I thought, okay, they're probably saying this is a party boat. So what that means is that if you're over 45, you don't want to have a good time anymore. I guess they think that you want to just sit in a rocking chair and just rock back and forth. The thought that was behind the head of someone that put a cruise out for people under the age of 45 was extremely disturbing because this is a cruise ship line that's well known and they think it's very acceptable. Okay. That was just one thing. Okay. I think the next part of this would be when we look at our ads that are put out for consumers. If you look at those ads and you see the way they're being addressed, you will see that for older people, the ads are, and this has to do with women too, there are always ads for ways to not look your age. That's what you see for advertising. How could you not look your age? Are you aging? Do you not want to look like you're aging? This is what you can do. And it's being pounded constantly that there's something wrong with getting older. And this is how you can change that over and over again.
You know,
Now,
Sandy, let me interrupt you for just a second. I was just reading an article that said that a lot of young girls are now so focused on age that they're actually using adult anti-aging products as if
mhm,
somehow, the normal aging process is meant to be there. But when a child starts using these products, it's not healthy. It's not healthy physically, and it's certainly not healthy mentally. There's a huge
it's
there's a huge component of this discrimination that affects people's mental health and daily living, isn't there?
absolutely. And again, it's being stressed the way it is because people are afraid of getting older. And until we eliminate that fear because of society making you think, okay, if you get older, it's such a bad thing. And not everybody ages the same way. Instead of people looking at age as every person is an individual and every person is different. Don't characterize us like we're a bunch of cows being herded together, okay? Because that's incorrect. But going back to advertisements, okay, you also have to deal with advertisements that go on in the form of I'm jumping things here. I don't want to jump things here. Let me go back. Okay. You again have advertisements that tell people they can be ageless. Okay. And this is constantly done. I heard an advertisement when I was in the car the other day, and this was addressing an ad for men. And they were asking men if they wanted to become ageless, and they were promoting all these different kinds of herbal things that they could take. Okay, and I thought, do they understand what they're saying? You can't be ageless unless you're dead. There's no way to not have an age. You have to have an age. But everybody's so afraid of the fact that we're getting older because we're made to be afraid, because society has made it look like it's an evil thing. And we have to all stand up and say it's not. Okay. Now, as far as the media goes, that's where it really gets bad. I don't know if many of you watch Saturday Night Live. Okay. I like it. I think it's a funny show. But so many times I sit there and I think, for real? I mean, Donna, you mentioned before about, talking about Biden, okay, and the age issue. They've done some things on Saturday Night Live about his age that honestly, I don't know how that show has not been taken off the air because it's beyond insulting. It's degrading. It's demoralizing. It's horrifying. Okay. And yet they do these things. They had they had a show on once, and one of the skits was talking about this woman who was having an issue walking because of her age. Okay. She didn't walk as well as she did before, and she couldn't get up and down from chairs. So it was the toilet skit, they called it. They showed this man advertising this toilet seat that when you sat on it, if you were older and having problems walking, and you were finished, you pressed the lever and you were shot into the air. So you were able to get up. Degradation at its finest. I mean, it's how do they do something like that and it's acceptable? Then they were speaking about Clint Eastwood. He's one of their favorites when it comes to age. Okay. And they were talking about that they were surprised that he's driving unsupervised, okay, at his age. And his new movie, The Mule, at the time, they were saying the new movie that he had out, The Mule, was a superhero movie for old people. Now, I can understand them saying some people, as they get older, have a problem driving because of their vision. But some people, when they're younger, have a problem driving because of their vision. Why not just say some people have a problem driving because of their vision? That would be an accurate description. It's always put back, though, to age, and that's ageism. Okay,
You
just
know,
being 90,
Sandy,
you know.
we're starting to run out of time, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. And I know this is something you and I could talk about for hours,
Forever.
but unfortunately, we don't have it. So as you know, the voters in New York State are going to have the opportunity to vote on ballot Proposition 1 this fall, the so-called New York State Equal Rights Amendment, which will add important protections to our state constitution, which are not currently included. And two of those focus on age discrimination and disability discrimination. So, Sandy, what will a yes vote on Prop 1 do for New Yorkers in the area of age discrimination?
Everything. And the reason for that is right now in our New York State Constitution, we're only protected against discrimination because of race or religion. We don't have any protection because of age discrimination. We don't have it because of disability either. The new wording will put that in the New York State Constitution. We'll be protected against age discrimination. So it will do everything to protect us. And we won't have to, we still probably will have to go to court if people don't respect what's in the Constitution, because people are people. But we will have a solid basis for those court cases. There won't be any of these loopholes that there now is happening out there. And Don, I want to say one thing fast on our other topic. Women are disproportionately affected with ageism much more than men. And I'll leave you with this thought. Men as they age are considered silver foxes. They're distinguished. Women as they age are considered sometimes hags. Okay. So I wanted to get that in because we are much more affected by ageism than men. Going back to the ERA, which is now Proposition 1. Okay. They've had a lot of challenges to it. But the reality of it is, yes, we do have laws now that somewhat protect us, but they don't totally against age discrimination. If this gets into the New York State Constitution, we will be protected against age discrimination.
And of course, the other thing is that laws are dependent on who is elected.
Absolutely.
And so that makeup of the legislature can change over time. The Constitution is a much more difficult process to change. So you're exactly right about that.
Right.
So I want to remind our viewers that Election Day is November 5th, which is preceded by 9 days of early voting here in New York State from October 25th to November 3rd. You can request an absentee ballot, or you can request a ballot by mail if you're unable to get to the polls or you're not going to be in your normal polling area. Be sure to flip your ballot on November 5th so that you can vote on the New York State ballot Proposition 1, because those are always on the back of the ballot. The people you vote for are on the front. So it's important that you flip that ballot so you can protect yourself from these kinds of discriminations. So, Sandy, thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation. You are a wonderful guest, and I understand that your forthcoming book is called The Shocking Truth About What Men Really Think About Women, which will be out next May. Maybe we'll have you back on the show back in the spring to find out just what the shocking truths are.
They're pretty shocking.
Thank you again.
You take care.
I will. These conversations are a production of North Country Matters. This show is a civic collaboration between the League of Women Voters of St. Lawrence County and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters.